Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things and welcome to another video, and today I am very excited because it is the 1st of July, which means it is time for Jane Austen July. So what I thought I would do today was just tell you 10 reasons why I love Jane Austen. So if you don't know, Jane Austen July is a month-long readathon hosted by me and Marissa from Blatantly Bookish. I'll link her channel down below and I'll link both of our announcement videos down below. And I thought it would be nice to kick off Jane Austen July with just 10 of the reasons why I love Jane Austen. I've definitely discussed some of the reasons why I love her work before, but I thought it would be nice to do a new version of this and just give you quick 10 reasons why I love Jane Austen. There'll be no spoilers in this video. I feel like I should stress that because some of my Jane Austen July videos will be spoilery. Reason number 1, I love her writing style. I just find her books eminently readable. They're really enjoyable and they flow really well. I think they are very accessible as classics go. Certainly, I feel like Jane Austen is easier to read than some of the Victorian authors that I love, like Charles Dickens and the Brontes. And there's also a lot of very clever things she does with her writing style that I enjoy, such as free indirect discourse, which is a fairly innovative thing at the time Jane Austen was writing, where her prose takes on a similar voice or tone to one of her characters, so it's not dialogue, but she's talking about something in a way they would, which is a really common technique now, but when she was writing was really innovative, so that's really cool. And her writing style in general I just find so enjoyable and witty and fun and just thoroughly readable. The second reason I love Jane Austen is not her readability, but her rereadability. I find her books so fun to reread. I'm gonna make a video in Jane Austen July all about why I love rereading Jane Austen and why I get new things out of her books on every single reread, but I really love reading her books again and again. I feel like her books really stand up to multiple readings and that you can learn new things and notice new things every time you reread a Jane Austen book, and that is another of the reasons why I love her work. The third thing I love about Jane Austen's books is the social criticism in there. Her books are so interesting as works of social critique, examining the time period that she lived in and her books are set in, examining the customs and social expectations and the moral norms of the time in such complex and wonderful ways. Her books often examine the position of women in the Regency era, examine class and money and respectability and what it means to be a lady or a gentleman. There are so many interesting themes and kind of social issues being explored through her books. But the fourth thing I love about her works is just what brilliant love stories Jane Austen writes. She can write a very good love story that is incredibly compelling and incredibly moving and just brilliantly done. Another thing I love about Jane Austen's work is her amazing character development and psychological depth, which I think is such an important part of her work and really well done, and also very important for the time she's writing in as well. I haven't read masses from Jane Austen's time period and before, but the books I have read from around Jane Austen's time period, such as Evelina by Frances Burney, the characterization is very flat, and Jane Austen's characterization in comparison is just even more impressive. Her characters have such important and interesting complex arcs over the course of their books. There are so much character development. If you think about Elizabeth Bennet in Pride and Prejudice, Mr. Darcy in Pride and Prejudice, or Emma in Emma, there's so many interesting stories of character development and growth which are so interesting, and her characters are really psychologically complex. Another thing I love is those characters of hers that are, at least on the surface, a little bit less psychologically complex. The nasty characters or the silly characters, the ones that make us laugh, and yet the fact that even though these characters on the surface feel much more like stock figures from other books, people like Mr. Collins and Mrs. Bennet, they're a bit over the top, but actually when you look underneath they still are psychologically complex. The way Mrs. Bennet reacts to certain situations and what she wants from life and wants for her daughters is really interesting, and that I find really interesting, the fact that Jane Austen can both kind of use exaggeration and humour in her characters but also have them be psychologically complex at the same time. Another thing I love about her work is the amazing dialogue. Jane Austen writes fantastic dialogue and I love it a lot. I find it beautiful and hilarious and wonderful. The literary flirting in some of her books is at a great level, and her dialogue is so clever for telling us so much about the characters and for being really rich and complex, but also she uses it sparingly and she doesn't report every single conversation between different characters, so there are lots of things that we don't hear direct firsthand, and the way she kind of manages that and manages dialogue as a whole is just really clever and wonderful in all of her books. The eighth thing I love about Jane Austen is how funny her work is. It's so witty and it's so humorous, and few things make me laugh as much as a Jane Austen book. Jane Austen leaves me in heaps of laughter. I find her characters and her writing so witty and so funny as Dickens. Dickens and Jane Austen for me are the height of humour. I have a very 19th century sense of humour. Jane Austen's humour and her wit, and the silly and smart things the characters say, and the witty and spiteful things the narrator says, it just gets me every time. But the ninth thing I love about Jane Austen is that alongside the wit and the humour, there's also like a real emotional depth and an emotional connection. Like, I get so emotionally invested in Jane Austen's characters and plot lines and stories because they are so rich and they are emotive, and when her characters suffer, you suffer with them, but when they're happy, you get that happiness too. Like, I do think her books are really emotionally involving, and while they are very, very funny as well, they also have their more serious parts that can be really emotional too. The 10th reason that I love Jane Austen is just that I love Jane Austen, by which I mean, one of the things I love about Jane Austen is that I feel like I have like a long history with Jane Austen, a long history of loving her books, which makes me love them all the more in like the glories of subjectivity and my like deep attachment to Jane Austen as a writer and like as a human being. I read my first Jane Austen novel more than 12 years ago. I have read all of her books at least twice. I've read Pride and Prejudice nearly 10 times. I worked part-time in the Jane Austen Centre in Bath for a year and spent like a year of my life just talking about Jane Austen's work and her life. She is the author whose life I know the most about because of working there. Like, there's a lot of other authors I love, like Dickens, where I love his books, but I don't actually know that much about his life. Whereas Jane Austen, like, I know a lot about her life. And I just really love her, and that kind of emotional connection, my like subjective attachment to Jane Austen, I think will mean that I always love her. So yes, those were 10 reasons why I love Jane Austen. Please let me know down in the comments why you love Jane Austen, if you do indeed love her, or why you don't love her if you don't. I'm very curious to know. And that's it. Welcome to Jane Austen July. I hope you have enjoyed this first video. You can look forward to plenty more Jane Austen related content in July, and that's it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.